Have you ever found yourself in a situation where just a glance, a slight frown from someone was enough to make you feel like you've been dragged back to the old days, days when you had to prove your worth simply because you didn't look like the person they expected? There are adversities in life that happen not because we do something wrong, but because we are misunderstood. In that moment, what would you choose? To silently endure it, or to stand up not for revenge, but to defend your own dignity? And if you were in exactly the same situation as the man in today's story, a calm black CEO with a long history of being judged, how would you handle being humiliated right in front of everyone by the very airline that's about to sign a multi-million-dollar contract with you? Before we begin, I want to ask you something. If you were insulted because of your appearance, how would you react? Join me on this journey. It may bring back old pains, but it may also open up new hope. And if you enjoy stories that touch upon the realities of life, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next emotional journey. Now, let's begin. That afternoon, Chicago O'Hare was busier than usual. The tourist season was approaching, and the rolling of thousands of suitcases mingled with the loudspeaker announcements, creating a symphony that only those who had flown for many years would find so familiar, almost peaceful. But for Elias Carter, 35 CEO of Halo Travel Gear, every airport always held two feelings: freedom and a slight tightness in his chest, as if the past were always waiting somewhere to remind him. Elias wore a charcoal hoodie, black cotton pants, and simple white shoes. He never wore flashy designer clothes when flying. Perhaps it was partly because he preferred simplicity. Another reason was that he was used to being judged solely by his appearance. When you're a black man and dressed simply, sometimes people think they understand you with just a glance. But today is an important day. Tomorrow he will meet Oliver Hayes, CEO of North Star Airlines, to sign the biggest partnership agreement ever. Halo Travel Gear, the luggage and travel accessories brand that Elias has built with blood, sweat, and many sleepless nights, is about to become the airline's exclusive partner, a turning point he has been pursuing for almost 3 years. Elias stood at the boarding gate, his hand resting lightly on the Halo X suitcase, the latest prototype. Beyond its simple design with a smooth, matte black finish and wheels that glide silently, everything about this suitcase was designed to touch with respect. He once told his team, "Luggage isn't just what you carry, it's how you're treated." A philosophy stemmed from the times he was treated as if his presence in first class was a mistake. Each time he remained silent, continued working, continued living. But the pain was still there, deep yet real. Passengers began to stream into the first-class cabin of North Star Airlines Flight NS-228. Their gray suits, navy vests, and gleaming leather bags created a striking contrast with Elias's understated appearance. He didn't mind. He had signed contracts before where the person opposite him didn't even know he was CEO until the secretary walked into the room and addressed him by his title. He handed his ticket to the gate attendant. The young woman looked at her uniform, then at him, and smiled somewhat awkwardly. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Carter." Elias nodded in thanks. The air inside the jet bridge was noticeably colder than outside. For some reason, every time he crossed this section, he felt like he was about to step into a story he couldn't predict. And today, that feeling was unusually strong. As Elias stepped into first class, he heard the sound of a flight attendant's shoes approaching. That was Lauren Mitchell, the flight attendant in charge of first class. Her blonde hair was neatly tied up in a bun, her face was sharp, but her eyes held a tired, slightly irritated look. The kind of look someone who had been through a long day and believed they understood every passenger. Lauren gave a formulaic smile. "Welcome aboard, sir." Elias responded with a slight smile. He wasn't trying to make a strong impression, and he didn't need to. He found seat 2A where the light from the window made the cabin feel warmer. He placed his backpack under the seat, then reached for his Halo X suitcase to put it in the overhead compartment. And that's the moment it all began. A voice rang out, sharp as a small knife. "Sir, that bag won't fit." Elias tilted his head slightly. Lauren was standing right next to him, hands on her hips, her eyes fixed on the suitcase as if it were something bothersome. He calmly said, "This suitcase meets international standards. I designed it myself to fit into all FAA standard baggage compartments." Lauren Nguyen Mai. "Sir, I've done this job for 11 years. I know what fits. A seemingly simple remark, but one that carries the weight of prejudice. Older Americans often call it that tone. The way they speak makes you understand they think you're trying to bend the rules, trying to appear knowledgeable. At that moment, Elias felt something very familiar. A chill spread from his chest down to his stomach. Not from anger, but from disappointment. He had hoped this flight would be peaceful. He smiled, slightly politely but not submissively. "May I try?" Lauren shook her head, then flipped open the trunk lid and closed it with a click. A faint sound, but enough to evoke memories he didn't want to remember. A few passengers glanced over. Some looked annoyed, others looked at Elias, waiting to see how he would react. In that moment he had to choose, to be angry or to remain calm as he always did. Elias sighed softly, then said, "Then I'll wait for the inspector to come and check." His voice wasn't harsh, but he didn't bow his head either. And so the real journey begins. If you had seen Elias Carter from afar that afternoon, you would have only seen a quiet, calm man walking slowly but surely. But behind that composure were years of learning to stand tall in rooms where people looked at him as if he had wandered into the wrong place. The strange thing is, the more Elias flew, the more accustomed he became to being judged. But accustomed doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. And sometimes the wounds of youth would return, caused by a simple shake of the head, a disrespectful remark, or a cold click like the one just now. Lauren stood a few steps away, arms crossed, her eyes still fixed on her conviction. He could guess she thought she was helping to protect the privileged space of this first-class cabin. But that only reminded Elias of something that had happened a long time ago. When he was 17, living in South Atlanta, he applied for a job at a travel accessories store in a shopping mall. When he walked in, the manager didn't even look at his resume and just said, "We're not hiring for that position anymore." But when Elias returned a few days later with his white friend, the manager immediately changed his attitude and said there were plenty of openings. Elias simply walked out in silence, not a word of reproach, not a word of explanation. From that day on, he vowed to himself that if one day he became strong and skilled enough to create something great, he would do it in a way that would make people look at his true character, not his skin color or appearance. That thought flashed through Elias's mind as he stood in first class, still clutching his Halo X suitcase. Lauren standing right in front of him, as if she were the guardian of the door to a world he was unworthy of entering. He heard the slow footsteps approaching, a softer sound, not as sharp and cold as Lauren's voice earlier. "What's going on here?" The middle-aged woman's voice was deep, soft, yet authoritative. Elias turned and saw Marilyn Oakley, the cabin's purser. The woman had graying hair and gentle yet sharp eyes, as if she had seen tens of thousands of passengers throughout her career. Lauren immediately straightened up. "Passenger insists his bag will fit, but it's clearly oversized." Marilyn looked at the suitcase. Then she looked at Elias. "Sir, may I quickly check it?" Elias nodded slightly. He lifted the Halo X with one hand. It was so light that most people were surprised when they tried it. He brought the suitcase up near the overhead compartment. Marilyn whispered, "Just place it gently." Elias followed suit. In a single breath, the suitcase slid in perfectly as if the compartment had been custom designed for it. Not a snag, not a scraping sound. A man in seat 3C exclaimed softly, "Wow, smooth as butter." Lauren stood motionless, her hands hanging loosely at her sides. Her expression shifted from confident to awkward, then to furious, as she realized she had been completely wrong, right in front of the passengers. Marilyn smiled politely at Elias. "It looks like it fits perfectly. Thank you for waiting." Elias replied softly, "Thank you, Marilyn." He deliberately called her by her name. Respect begets respect. That always works. As Marilyn walked away to coordinate boarding, Lauren lingered for a few more seconds. There was something in her eyes, not remorse, but annoyance, as if the fault wasn't hers, but the suitcase, or Elias's. She turned away without saying a word. Elias sat down in seat 2A. Sunlight streamed in through the window, illuminating his face, revealing features that were both strong and serene. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, trying to let things pass. But the heavy feeling in his chest remained like a small but cold stone. The flight was scheduled to last nearly 8 hours. A long night in the air, and although he wanted to keep his mind focused for the meeting tomorrow morning, Elias couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. It wasn't because he was surprised, but because he thought he had gotten past the stage where things like that could shake him. But the truth is, those wounds only lay dormant, they didn't disappear. He took out his phone and opened a new note. His fingers typed slowly, line by line, without rushing. Boarding incident, 4:42 p.m. Attendant Lauren Mitchell refused to let me place my carry-on. Stated bag was oversized. Tone used condescending. Attempted intimidation by closing the overhead bin. Purser intervened. Bag fit perfectly. Elias paused. He took a deep breath, then added, impact. Felt dismissed before I said a word. When he folded his phone, shut the suitcase, in the top compartment seemed to become a symbol of something bigger, not just a product he created, but proof that he had come a long way, only to still have to confront things that shouldn't exist in this day and age. The engine noise gradually increased. The cabin turned a warm yellow. Passengers began to settle into their seats. Lauren walked past, trying to maintain a professional expression but still avoiding Elias's gaze. He looked out the window. Chicago was shrinking below. The streets were like thin lines, the buildings like tiny toys. No matter how many times he flew, he always loved this feeling, the moment when the world below seemed weightless, leaving only the stillness of the sky. But tonight, something is different. It's not the sky that's still. It's you who are still. But deep beneath the surface, an underground current is stirring. He wondered, why did something so small weigh so heavily on him? Why was a mere glare enough to shatter the peace he had tried to maintain for so many years? He answered himself, because it's not just a matter of today, it's a matter of a lifetime. Elias turned back to look at the cabin. Everything was calm, as if nothing had happened. But he knew a moment like this can change everything. And he had no idea that what happened this afternoon, with just a glare, a click of the luggage compartment, would become the catalyst for a bigger transformation than he ever imagined. A flight, a suitcase, a moment. Sometimes that's all it takes to change an entire system. North Star Airlines Flight NS-228 began to glide through the first clouds. The cabin transitioned to a soft yellow light, creating the feeling of a luxurious living room suspended in the sky. But for Elias Carter, that luxury wasn't enough to mask the heavy heart that seeped into his every breath. He had flown a lot. First class on long journeys had always been his haven, a place where he could find peace to work, think, or simply allow himself to lie down. But tonight, something felt strange, as if this cabin wasn't truly welcoming. In front of him, the small folding table was unfolded, the glass of water set to one side, leaving enough space for the laptop. He placed his hand on the smooth, cool surface of the laptop, but didn't open it immediately. Sometimes, before starting anything, he needed a moment to clearly see his own reflection in the hazy, reflective glass of the screen. Elias exhaled very softly. Only he could hear it. A passenger in seat 1C, a middle-aged man in a navy suit, glancing over at him briefly, not out of curiosity. Rather, it was like someone unconsciously observing every movement in a small compartment where everyone tries to maintain politeness. He looked at the suitcase that had just been placed in the overhead compartment and nodded slightly as if in approval. Elias responded with a small nod and turned his gaze towards the window. The strange thing was, the more he looked at the sky, the more he remembered the moment Lauren closed the trunk with that soft click. It was very small, but enough to unlock a memory compartment he had always kept locked away. Years ago, when Elias was a student at Georgia State University, he experienced a flight he would never forget. At the time, he couldn't afford first class, and even economy class tickets had to be booked through a student assistance program. One day, he boarded the plane with a cheap backpack whose zipper was a little stuck. The flight attendant, a young woman, glared at him as he tried to stuff his backpack into the overhead compartment. She said, "You'd be better off taking the bus." He remembered every word clearly. He remembered the burning sensation spreading across his face. He remembered bowing his head and remaining silent. Back then, he didn't have the strength to say that he deserved to stand there like anyone else. Today, he's different, but old memories sometimes find a way to come back. Lauren walked past, gently pushing the service cart across the cabin floor. Her face remained expressionless, a professional mask that every flight attendant learns to maintain. But Elias saw something harden in her eyes when their gazes met for a brief moment. It's not hatred, that is unacceptable. The refusal to accept that she was wrong, that he wasn't who she thought he was, that he hadn't come to cause trouble. He just existed outside the mold she had set for him. Lauren placed her glass of water gently on the tray for passenger 1C, but when she set Elias's glass down, her hand pressed down a little harder. A drop of water splashed from the rim of the glass, rolling down the table like a tiny drop of sweat. "Thank you," Elias said, his voice even and without reproach. Lauren didn't look at him. She just softly replied, "Sir." Not his name, just a lifeless sir. In first class, where everyone is addressed by their first name as a sign of respect, being repeatedly called "sir" is enough for a discerning person to notice the difference. Elias didn't want his emotions to override his reason. He knew tomorrow's meeting was incredibly important. The partnership with North Star Airlines would take the Halo travel gear brand to a whole new level. If successful, every first-class passenger on the airline would receive a Halo accessory for the next year. It was an 8-figure deal and a milestone in his life. However, he also understood that he couldn't ignore what happened today, because this wasn't just a personal matter. It reflected how a larger system operates and the flaws within it. Marilyn approached again. She looked at Elias with sincere eyes. "Mr. Carter, I apologize if anything I said offended you earlier." Elias shook his head. "It's nothing, Marilyn. I understand this job can be stressful sometimes." She smiled, a weary but kind smile. "Thank you for your patience. Not everyone can remain as calm as you." When Marilyn left, Elias felt a little lighter. In any system, there are always people like Marilyn, people who heal the wounds that others unintentionally inflict. But sometimes, one right action isn't enough to erase one wrong action. Elias opened his laptop. The light from the screen shone on his face, reflecting in his deep, determined eyes. He glanced through the slides, prepared for the presentation: cabin simulations, new suitcase designs, loyalty programs, and growth figures for Halo travel gear. Everything was perfect. Every word, every chart, every image was concise. But in this moment, he knew the presentation had to change. He opened a new page. In the middle of the page, he typed 6 words. "Respect begins with perception. Respect starts with how we see each other." Then he sat there for a few minutes. He didn't write any more. There was no need to rush. First-class cabins are where ultimate comfort is expected. But comfort doesn't just come from spacious seats, fine wine, or a warm dinner. It also comes from the feeling that you are seen as a valued individual. Elias spent his youth trying to understand this. It's just a shame that not everyone understands it. A slight sound made him look up. The man in seat 1C tilted his head slightly towards him. "I apologize for overhearing a little bit of what happened just now," he said softly. "I just wanted to say, you handled it very properly." Elias was slightly surprised. "Thank you." He smiled kindly. "A man like you makes others reflect on themselves. Keep it up." Those words, though simple, felt like a warm breeze to Elias. Not too strong, but just enough to blow away some of the burden he was carrying. The plane vibrated slightly. An announcement was made that the cabin lights would be dimmed soon so passengers could rest. Lauren walked down the aisle, checking for safety. As she passed Elias, she seemed about to say something, but then stopped. Maybe it's because she's not ready. Maybe it's because she doesn't think she's wrong. Or maybe it's because she's afraid. Elias didn't know, and he didn't care right now. He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. The sky outside stretched endlessly, but within this small first-class cabin, a silent battle raged not between two people, but between humanity and prejudice. A battle he's been involved in his whole life. And tonight, it will lead to something no one on this flight could have foreseen. The cabin had calmed down after dinner. The dim lights shifted to a soft blue, mimicking the feeling of sunset, helping passengers gradually drift off to sleep. The steady hum of the engines was like the calm breathing of a massive body lifting the entire aircraft as it soared through the night sky. It seemed as though everything had calmed down, but for Elias Carter it was just the calm before the next wave. He opened his eyes when he heard the wheels of the service cart approaching. Lauren Mitchell was coming towards him. Her face no longer showed the irritation she had displayed at boarding, but it hadn't softened either. It was the face of someone trying to keep everything under control, but with a fragile defense beneath the surface. Lauren stopped in front of his chair. "Would you like some coffee, sir?" The question sounded perfectly normal, but the way she emphasized the word "sir" softly but sharply was enough for Elias to realize he was being pushed further and further away from even the minimum level of respect. "Yes, thank you." His voice was even and low, but not at all shaky. She poured the coffee. But as she handed it to him, the cup slipped slightly from her hand, and a drop of hot coffee fell onto his hand. Ah! Elias gently withdrew his hand. Lauren said quickly, "Oops, sorry," but her eyes didn't meet his. Elias set his coffee cup down on the table. A silence fell between them. Not a comfortable silence. A silence filled with suppressed tension. He could say something, he could ask the waitress to be more attentive, or he could call Marilyn. But Elias simply said, "It's all right." And that very sentence delivered with such strange calmness unnerved Lauren. She turned away immediately as if afraid that staying another second would cause her defenses to crumble. The cabin remained still. But the air around Elias was not. It became thicker, slightly heavier, as if every small action were being recorded into the memory of this space. A little while later, as the cabin prepared for the night, Lauren went around to collect the cups and saucers. When she came to Elias again, she lingered longer than necessary. He looked up and saw her eyes waver slightly, a mixture of tension and disbelief. "Sir," she began, "I hope you will cooperate and help make things easier for us during the flight." The words weren't loud, not harsh, but they were as sharp as a needle under the dim light. Elias felt his heart beat a little faster. Not from anger, but from surprise. Cooperation. What had he done, besides remain calm all this time? He gently asked, "What kind of cooperation, Lauren?" She pursed her lips, like the suitcase incident, for example. "I was just following the rules, but you, Marilyn, appeared at that precise moment like a breeze that cooled the hot air in the room." Lauren, her voice was low and firm. "I will continue my service in this area." Lauren stood up straight. A flush ran across her cheeks. "Yes, Marilyn." She pushed the serving cart faster than usual, causing the glass in the tray to vibrate slightly. Elias looked at Marilyn, their eyes meeting in a silent understanding. She said softly, "I noticed. I sincerely apologize, Mr. Carter." Elias shook his head. "I know this job is stressful. I don't blame anyone." Marilyn slowly sat down in the aisle chair, the kind flight attendants only sit in when necessary. "You seem quite familiar with things like this," she said not intrusively. It was simply a fact she saw all too clearly. Elias was silent for a few seconds before replying, "I wish I didn't know him." That honest remark made Marilyn freeze. She looked at him as if he were someone who had just uttered something too heavy to let slip into thin air. "He didn't deserve to be treated like that," she said. "Nobody deserves it." Part of Elias wanted to brush it off with a polite smile. But tonight he had no intention of hiding his truth. "There are times," he said slowly, "when I think I've stepped out of the shadow of prejudice. But then just one moment, one very small act, is enough to remind me that it never really disappeared." Marilyn fell silent. Elias rarely said things like that to just anyone. "You're so strong," she whispered. But Elias shook his head. "I'm just used to keeping myself from breaking down." A long silence, but not the heavy silence from before. This was a silence of empathy. Marilyn stood up, placing her hand on the armrest of his chair as a guarantee. "Tonight I'll take care of this part of the cabin. You rest." Elias nodded. As Marilyn walked away, he felt a little lighter. There are people who, with just a few words and a few seconds spent beside you, can pull you back from the brink of despair. But that peace didn't last long. About an hour later, the cabin was enveloped in the dim blue light of nighttime sleep mode. The other passengers had all reclined their seats wrapped in soft blankets. Only Elias remained awake, staring at his laptop screen. He was reviewing the slides, but his mind couldn't focus. Then a small incident occurred, but it was enough to cause a stir. Lauren walked past again, this time without a chauffeur. Elias didn't notice until she stopped. He looked up. She looked at his laptop. The screen's light reflected off her face, revealing the shift in her eyes, curiosity, tension, then bewilderment. Elias frowned slightly. What had she just seen? Lauren swallowed her voice so low it was almost a whisper. "Halo, travel gear. CEO, Elias Carter." She read the text displayed on the slide that was open on the screen. His photo in a Forbes article is clear, a confident smile. The caption reads, "Meet the man redefining luxury travel." Lauren turned pale. Elias looked straight at her. Not angry, not arrogant, just the look of someone waiting to see how you face the truth. In that moment, the engine noise in the cabin seemed to disappear. Only Lauren's heavy breathing remained. "You," she choked out. "You're the one who'll be meeting with the CEO of the company tomorrow morning." Elias didn't answer. But sometimes, Silence is the most powerful answer. Lauren took a step back. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't apologize. She didn't justify herself. She didn't say anything else. She just turned away so quickly she almost ran out of the compartment. Elias watched, and deep inside him, it wasn't a feeling of triumph, but a quiet sadness, because he knew if it weren't for that laptop, she would never have realized his true worth. How others perceive you sometimes only changes when they get to know who you are. For Elias, that was one of the most subtle, yet profound pains. Outside the window, the night sky was like a dark, star-filled sea. Clouds drifting beneath the plane resembled snow-capped mountains, silent and invisible to the world below. The NS-228 had been flying for nearly 3 hours. Most of the passengers were asleep. The cabin was bathed in a soft blue light, creating the feeling of a tranquil tunnel leading to another world. But Elias Carter's mind was far from at peace. After Lauren saw the slide with his picture and the words CEO, everything became unusually quiet. She didn't return to his area. Every time Elias heard footsteps from the back of the cabin, he knew it was Marilyn, not Lauren. He leaned his head back against the seat, gazing at the cabin ceiling designed to mimic the night sky. Artificial stars twinkled gently, a detail passengers usually overlooked, but for Elias, it seemed strangely different tonight. It was as if those stars were asking him, "What are you going to do about what happened tonight?" Elias closed his eyes but didn't sleep. In the darkness behind his eyelids, childhood memories flooded back. The times teachers mistook his name, the group meetings where his opinions were ignored, until a white classmate repeated them exactly. Even the meetings with business partners where everyone shook his hand except him, until they learned he was the CEO. An old pain no longer as sharp as before, but still enough to make his chest ache slightly. Elias opened his eyes when he heard the seat in front of him move slightly. Jonathan Reed, the man in seat 1C, stood up, turned to look at him, and lowered his voice as if afraid of waking the entire cabin. "You're still not asleep," Elias smiled faintly. "I couldn't sleep." Jonathan nodded as if he understood that feeling better than anyone else. He adjusted his thin sweater and said softly, "At this age I've learned one thing. Sometimes the things that keep you awake aren't because you're weak, but because you're too strong to pretend you don't see them." Elias was slightly surprised by the sincerity in his words. "What are you trying to say?" Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his eyes deep and slightly sad. "I saw everything that happened at boarding, and also when they served the water. I didn't interfere, maybe that's wrong, but I wanted to tell you this, Carter." He paused, then continued. "Many people would say it's a small matter, but I know that small things like that, when repeated over and over again, can create a big wound." Elias looked at him longer. "Thank you," he said. "Not everyone understands." Jonathan smiled faintly. "I've been through it too. Not exactly your case, but pain is pain. And I've realized sometimes God puts us in a position where we don't just fix a small mistake, but fix the whole system that allowed that mistake to exist." Elias turned to look out the window again. Those words struck him deeply. Fix the whole system. That's what he's always thought about Halo Travel Gear, a brand that doesn't just sell suitcases, it sells experiences, it sells respect. Jonathan looked at his watch and said, "You should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day for you." Elias nodded slightly. "Me too." Jonathan smiled and returned to his seat. The cabin fell silent again. Elias took a deep breath, closed his laptop, but didn't put it away. He left it slightly ajar, allowing the faint light from the screen to reflect a portion of his own face onto the matte metal surface of the Halo X briefcase. A half-clear, half-blurred image, much like his inner self at that moment. Then a faint sound reached his ears, so soft that only someone awake could hear it. The sound of stumbling footsteps. Elias opened his eyes immediately. Lauren Mitchell was walking up from the back of the compartment. The blue light made her face even paler, her hands trembling slightly as if she were struggling with something. As she passed Elias, she paused. No one else was awake. No one heard. No one witnessed it. Lauren opened her mouth, but then closed it again. She stared at the laptop on his desk, her eyes filled with a haunting gaze as if his image in the slides was still etched in her mind. Finally, she managed to utter a few words, "Mr. Carter." "I." Her voice was almost breaking. Elias didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, his gaze neither cold nor harsh, just waiting for what she wanted to say. Lauren swallowed hard. I don't know who you are. The words made Elias's chest tighten slightly. Not because he was expecting an apology, but because those words proved a painful truth. How she treats him depends on who she thinks he is. Elias sat up straight, looking deep into her eyes. Lauren, he said slowly, I don't need you to know who I am to treat me kindly. The words struck Lauren like a silent blow. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, trying to hide the emotions welling up inside her. I beg. Before she could finish her sentence, the plane shook slightly. An announcement blared over the loudspeaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing minor turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts. Lauren immediately turned away, as if freed from that awkward moment. She hurried towards the back of the cabin. Elias watched him go. Not with hatred, but with a sadness that was hard to name. He fastened his seatbelt and wondered if this was her only chance to muster the courage to tell the truth. Perhaps she intended to apologize. Perhaps not. But more importantly, would that apology come from genuine remorse, or simply because she feared the consequences after learning he was the CEO? The plane shook once more violently, then stabilized. The cabin lights dimmed slightly again to reassure the passengers. Elias exhaled slowly. At that moment, Marilyn approached and checked each person's seatbelt. When she reached Elias, she bent down slightly and whispered, If she causes any trouble, just tell me. Elias shook his head. I'm fine. Marilyn looked at him for a long time, then whispered softly, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. People like you possess a kind of power that many don't know how to confront. Elias wasn't sure he possessed the power she spoke of, but he understood what she meant. There are people who are afraid to see the truth about themselves until they realize that the person they despise stands in a position they cannot reach. A moment later, when the cabin fell silent again, Elias found himself thinking about what Jonathan had said. God has put me in a position to fix the whole system. Perhaps tonight's events weren't just a coincidence. Perhaps this is a reminder that tomorrow's journey isn't just about signing a contract. It's also an opportunity to change something bigger. As those thoughts settled in his mind, Elias's eyes finally grew weary. He pulled the blanket up, rested his head against the back of the chair, and closed his eyes. The sound of the engine faded into the distance, and my heart rate slowed. Just before falling asleep, he thought of only one thing. Tomorrow will be a very long day. Around midnight, as NS-228 flew over the vast, dark sea between Canada and the North Atlantic, the cabin was completely asleep. Soft breaths, the rustling of blankets, the rubbing of pillows against seats, all combined to create a very quiet symphony of the high altitude. Only the steady hum of the engines remained like a giant heart keeping hundreds of people safe in the endless sky. Elias Carter opened his eyes. He couldn't remember how long he'd been asleep. Maybe just an hour. Maybe less. The darkness before him wasn't entirely black. A strip of LED lights mimicking moonlight cast a soft, silvery blue hue over the cabin. In that light, everything seemed peaceful, as if this flight held no conflict whatsoever. But inside Elias, a wave of emotion rose gently, like the night tide, simmering quiet but very real. He adjusted his neck pillow, then looked out the window. There were no stars outside, just an absolute blackness. Every time Elias looked into that blackness, he saw a truth in the sky. Whether you're in first class or economy class, you're still in the same block of metal, the same endless space, the same journey. Yet with just a glance or a word, someone can make you feel like you're standing in two different worlds. He recalled Lauren's face when she saw the slides on his laptop. It wasn't the face of someone who realized they were wrong. Rather, it was the face of someone who feared having to pay the price. Elias didn't want that. He'd never believed in inflicting pain on others to prove you right. But he also couldn't ignore the fact that Lauren needed to face the consequences of her actions, not just against him, but against so many others before. A soft sound of footsteps made him turn his head. It's Marilyn. She walked slowly, without a cart, carrying only a small water bottle and 2 paper cups. Are you still awake? She said, her voice very soft. I can't sleep soundly, Elias replied. Me too. Marilyn sat down in a nearby folding chair. The blue light shone on her silver hair, making her look like a silent firekeeper in a cabin at night. She poured him some water and said, I know what happened tonight must have weighed heavily on your mind. Elias hesitated for a moment, then nodded. There was no need to pretend to be strong in front of someone so observant and understanding. Marilyn continued. Lauren is a skilled flight attendant, but she sometimes lets her emotions and biases show. I've seen it a few times. Not with all passengers, but especially with those who don't look like the kind of passengers she thinks first class should have. Elias was silent, not shocked, not surprised, just sad. She continued, I can't know everything she's done or said before, but I can tell you one thing for sure. You're not the first person to feel excluded. It was a harsh word, but Elias knew he needed to hear it. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice lowering, for someone like you, these things can leave very deep scars, can't they? Elias took a slow breath and said, truthfully, I thought. I had moved past the stage where I'm affected by such small things, but tonight I realized the old wounds don't disappear, they just lie dormant. Marilyn said nothing more, but her slight nod was like an invisible embrace, warm but not intrusive. A moment later she stood up. I'll prepare breakfast early for the cabin. If you need anything, just ring the bell. Elias nodded in thanks. Marilyn walked away, leaving him alone with the sound of the engine. As soon as she left, a soft murmur arose from the back of the cabin. Elias returned. 2 passengers had just left their seats to go to the restroom, a man in his 42nd and an older woman. Both glanced towards Elias and his slightly open laptop. The man whispered to the woman, I think he's a big businessman. You know, the type of guy who changes industries. The woman replied softly. And yet the flight attendant. They stopped when they saw Elias looking at them. He just smiled gently so they wouldn't feel caught. But he heard everything, and that left him feeling both relieved and hurt. Relieved because someone understood. Hurtful because he needed to be a big businessman for people to change their way of treating him. When they left, Elias sighed a soft but deep sigh. He opened his laptop and scrolled to the last slide of the presentation. The slide had the following text: Luxury is not a product, it's how a human being feels. He gazed at it for a long time. He had written this sentence 2 years ago, but tonight it resonated more powerfully than ever before. A small, sudden sound rang out thud. Elias was slightly startled, then realized it was the sound of someone dropping something on the floor at the back of the cabin. He tilted his head to look. Lauren was there, bending down to pick up a bottle of water. In the blue light, he could clearly see her hands trembling slightly. He didn't intend to look for long, but just as she looked up, their eyes met. A moment that was both unexpected and difficult to describe. The coldness, the contempt were gone. There was something else in Lauren's eyes, fear. And an unspoken regret. Lauren stood tall, as if gathering all her courage to approach him. Elias didn't know what she intended to do, but then she heard the loudspeaker turn on Marilyn speaking. We are about to enter an area with cold weather. It will be a little shaky. Please fasten your seatbelts. Lauren immediately turned and hurried backward, as if the conversation had been cut short by fate before it could even begin. Elias watched her. Just a few seconds, but he felt something changing. Not in her, in himself. And it was in that very moment that he made a decision. Tomorrow morning he will have a frank conversation with North Star Airline CEO Oliver Hayes. Not just about the contract, but about how the airline views and treats its passengers. He wasn't seeking revenge. He wanted change, a real change. He closed his eyes again more deeply, more completely. The cabin was silent. The whole night was silent. But deep inside him a fire was being kindled. The fire of a person who doesn't want to hurt anyone, but also won't allow anyone to disrespect their dignity. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning Chicago time, but London time. The sky outside was already beginning to change color. A faint silver streak cut across the night, like the sun's first brushstroke across the sky. The cabin of NS 228 remained quiet, but no longer the deep silence of the middle of the night, rather a silence preparing for something about to unfold. Elias Carter opened his eyes again. He could feel the gentle movement of the plane as it descended. His body was still tired, but his mind was as clear as if he had only dozed off for a few minutes. He sat up and gently pulled back the window curtain. A long, shimmering beam of light appeared, reflecting on his face. It was dawn over the Atlantic, and that dawn made him think of a new beginning. Elias raised his hand to his face. He needed to mentally prepare for the meeting with CEO Oliver Hayes, not only to finalize the contract, but also to initiate a dialogue that he knew would be difficult but necessary. Suddenly, he heard light footsteps. Marilyn appeared with a cup of hot coffee on a tray. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice as warm as the sun's rays. "Good morning, Marilyn," Elias replied. "I brought you some coffee. We'll be landing in about an hour and a half." Elias held the coffee cup, the warmth from the cup transferring to his hand. "Thank you, ma'am. Last night, you helped me so much." Marilyn smiled faintly. "Actually, you've already helped yourself. You've kept calm, and not everyone can do that." Elias remained silent. He knew Marilyn was trying to encourage him. But what troubled him more was the truth not everyone could remain calm when treated with contempt. And people often only praised such calmness when they didn't understand its true value. She placed her hand on the armrest of his seat as gently as a breeze. "After landing, someone from the airline will be there to pick you up, right?" "Yes," Elias said. "I'll meet Oliver Hayes right here in the lounge." Marilyn's eyes shone with genuine respect. "He'll need to hear everything you have to say." Elias nodded slowly. "And I will speak." Marilyn stood up, preparing to leave, but as she turned, a small voice came from the back of the cabin. "Marilyn, can I help you get ready?" They both turned around. Lauren Mitchell was standing there. Her face was pale in the soft blue light as if she had been awake all night. Her eyes were slightly swollen, whether from lack of sleep or from an unseen internal struggle was unclear. Marilyn looked at her for a moment, then said in a serious but not cold voice, "You can help me prepare breakfast." Lauren nodded slightly and followed Marilyn to the back of the cabin. Elias continued to watch. Not because he was expecting anything, but because he noticed something in Lauren's gait, a hesitation, a heaviness, like someone trying to muster the courage to do something very difficult. A moment of silence descended. 30 minutes later, as the cabin lights were dimmed for passengers to wake up for breakfast, Lauren reappeared. Gone was the haughty, aloof demeanor she had displayed during boarding. She walked more slowly, more cautiously. Every movement was controlled as if she feared making another mistake. When she reached Elias's seat, she stopped. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was so soft and shaky that Elias had to lean closer to hear her clearly. He looked up. Lauren clasped her hands together as if trying to keep them from trembling further. She took a breath. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you last night." The apology wasn't smooth. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't perfect like the apologies in the movies. But it was real. Lauren bowed deeply. "I was wrong. There was no reason for me to behave that way. I apologize for making you feel disrespected." Elias looked at her for a long time. He didn't speak, nod, or shake his head. But there was listening in his eyes. Lauren continued, her voice choked with emotion. "Yesterday, I thought you were just a fussy passenger. I didn't know anything about you. But this morning I realized," she stopped. Her eyes turned red. "I realized I shouldn't have needed to know who you were to treat you kindly." Those words made Elias's heart ache. Lauren swallowed hard. "I'm truly sorry. No excuses. No blaming work pressure. Only honest confrontation." Elias gently set his coffee cup down on the table. He didn't want to rush to answer, because sometimes silence is also a form of respect. Finally, he said, "Thank you for saying that." Lauren looked up, her eyes filled with both anticipation and fear. "I'm not perfect," Elias continued. "I've made mistakes too, and what I value most is honesty." Lauren blinked, tears welling up, but she held them back. Elias looked directly at her, speaking slowly and clearly. "I accept your apology." Lauren nodded slightly, a faint smile appearing, a smile so full of emotion that it was almost impossible to describe. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she left, walking more slowly, her figure lighter as if she had finally let go of a huge burden. Elias watched, not happy. No victory, no satisfaction. It was just a strange feeling of peace, because he knew sometimes forgiveness isn't about comforting others, but about freeing oneself from a heavy heart. As the cabin came alive again for breakfast, as the trays of food were brought out, and as everyone pulled back the window curtains to watch the golden light appear on the horizon, Elias felt a great weight lifted from his heart. He looked outside. The London sky was beginning to brighten. A band of pale pink clouds stretched across the horizon, soft as silk. This morning he'll be meeting with Oliver Hayes, and that conversation will decide not only the contract between Halo Travel Gear and North Star Airlines, but also how the airline will address an issue they may have overlooked for too long. Elias was no longer angry with Lauren. but he also understood that the story didn't end with an apology. It's only just beginning. Suddenly, the loudspeaker switched on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Collins speaking. We will be landing at London Heathrow in approximately 20 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts." Elias fastened his seatbelt. He looked at his laptop, then up at the sky. A new day is dawning, and along with it was a dialogue larger than anyone on this flight could have imagined. London that early morning was bathed in a soft gray light, both cool and serene. As the plane door opened, a breeze carrying the familiar scent of mist and metal from Heathrow Airport filled the cabin. Elias Carter stepped off the plane, his Halo X suitcase gliding smoothly across the carpet. A man in a black suit stood just outside the door, carefully holding a name tag, Mr. Elias Carter, North Star Airlines Executive Escort. Elias nodded slightly in greeting. "We've been tasked with escorting you to the VIP lounge, Mr. Carter. Sir Oliver Hayes is waiting there." The escort's voice was polite but slightly tense, as if he had been instructed to show utmost attentiveness. Elias followed him through the VIP entrance. No one jostled, no noise, only the steady footsteps and the gentle rolling of his suitcase like a whisper. Lauren Mitchell stood a few meters away next to the flight attendants preparing to disembark after completing the procedures. As Elias passed, she bowed deeply. She said nothing. She didn't try to hold him back. She didn't offer any justification. Just a bow, full of remorse. Elias responded with a very slight nod, then he walked away. The North Star Airlines VIP lounge was so quiet, he could hear the staff gently drawing the curtains. The warm, yellow light from the ceiling reflected off the oak table, creating a cozy atmosphere despite the still chilly sky outside. In the corner of the room, Oliver Hayes, the company's CEO, a tall man with neatly combed salt and pepper hair, was standing with his back to the door, looking out at the street through the thick glass. When Elias entered, he turned around, and immediately a friendly, warm smile appeared. "Elias, it's a pleasure to meet you. Welcome to London." They shook hands, a firm, genuine handshake conveying undisguised respect. "It's a pleasure, Oliver." They sat down. A waiter brought the company's signature coffee, but before Elias could touch the cup, Oliver leaned toward him, his expression changing. "Elias, I want to ask you something right now." His voice was deep and serious, but not harsh. "There was a problem with this morning's flight, right? It's not an open-ended question. It's not a curious question. Rather, it's a question from someone who already knows the story to some extent." Elias set his coffee cup down on the table. "So, you heard?" Oliver sighed softly and nodded slightly. "Marilyn Oakley sent me a brief report, while the plane was still in the air." Elias was a little surprised. Marilyn, that quiet, refined woman, had taken the initiative to do this. "She has a lot of respect for him," Oliver said, "and she thinks I need to know before this meeting begins." He placed his hands on the table, his fingers intertwined. "But I want to hear it from you, Elias. From your perspective, from your experience." Those moments from last night's airplane cabin echoed in Elias's mind: the suitcase, the scrutinizing glance, the click of the overhead compartment closing, the coffee spill on his hand, Lauren's forced smile, his silence, the apology at dawn. They all appeared as bright spots merging into a straight line in my mind. He sat up straight, not angry, not trembling, just the calmness of someone accustomed to recounting pain without letting it tear him apart again. "Oliver," he began, "I'll be frank." He nodded. "Please." "The problem isn't the suitcase," Elias said. "No," Oliver replied. "I know. The problem," Elias continued, "is the way I'm being looked at. Before I even say a word." That sentence made Oliver close his eyes slightly, as if it had struck him where he feared most. Elias recounted everything. From the incident at boarding, from Lauren's prejudiced gaze, from how she ignored him while serving drinks, from the drop of coffee that fell on his hand, from how she called him sir instead of his name while other passengers were addressed more informally, from their unfinished conversation at midnight, from her sincere apology early that morning. He told the story very slowly and clearly, no additions, no omissions. When he finished speaking, Oliver sat motionless as if nailed to his chair. The room fell so silent that Elias could hear the faint hum of the coffee maker in the distance. Finally, Oliver spoke in a voice so low it was almost hoarse. "Elias, I'm ashamed." He stood up. He didn't walk across the room. He didn't exaggerate his emotions. He just stood there, his hands on the table. This is my airline. This is the culture we've been working to build for the past 12 years. And last night, one of my employees in first class, the class, considered the face of the brand, treated the airline's most important partner in a way that I find unacceptable. Elias said nothing. He wanted to hear the rest. Oliver took a deep breath. But what shames me most isn't that you were the one who was treated badly. He pointed to his chest. Because I know this has happened to thousands of other passengers. People who aren't CEOs. They don't have the power to speak out. They don't have the chance to be heard by me. Those words made Elias's throat tighten slightly. Last night, Oliver continued, I stayed up until 4 a.m., reading through all the internal reports concerning Lauren Mitchell. It's no surprise to learn that she's been reprimanded multiple times for unprofessional conduct toward minority passengers. Elias tightened his grip slightly. He didn't want Lauren's career ruined. He only wanted the truth to be revealed and for those in power to take action. Elias, Oliver said slowly, each word like a stone placed on the ground. I take responsibility, and I won't let this slide. Elias looked him straight in the eye. Oliver, I don't want anyone punished to please me. I just want real change, Oliver responded with a sharp, resolute look, and I want you to lead that change with us. The room seemed to freeze at that sentence. Elias leaned his head back slightly, not because he didn't understand, but because the man had just said exactly what he had been mulling over all night. Use this partnership to reform how the airline views and serves passengers, Oliver Elias said, his voice slow and firm. I will sign a contract with North Star Airlines, but only on one condition. Oliver raised his eyebrows, not out of worry, but in anticipation. We shouldn't just cooperate on suitcases. We must cooperate on culture. Oliver gave a slight, almost proud smile. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, Elias continued. I want to build a new training program with Marilyn Oakley. I want the voices of people like me to be included in the service process. I want respect to be the standard, not the exception. Oliver stood up, completely extending his hand. Elias, if you agree, we will not only change the flying experience, we will change the mindset of the aviation industry. Elias stood up. The two men shook hands, a long handshake, definitely, carrying the weight of something more than a contract. At that moment, the lounge door creaked open. It's Marilyn. Excuse me, she said, I don't want to disturb you, but someone wants to see Mr. Carter. Elias tilted his head slightly. Who is it? Marilyn replied, her voice soft but containing something profound. Lauren Mitchell. Oliver tightened his grip on his briefcase. Elias looked out the window. Lauren stood there, her eyes red, her hands clasped together. No more defenses, no more fear. Just the raw sincerity of someone wanting to make amends. And it was that very moment when the three of them stood in a quiet lounge bathed in London's light that opened a whole new chapter in the story. The atmosphere in the VIP lounge became as heavy as London's thick fog. Lauren Mitchell stood in the doorway, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Despite trying to regain her composure, her eyes were still red, like someone who had endured a long, sleepless night, or a soul confronting its own mistakes. Elias Carter stood upright, his expression calm but not cold. Oliver Hayes merely glanced at the two of them, then nodded slightly at Elias. Would you like to speak to her privately? Elias replied softly. Yes. Oliver placed his hand on his shoulder, a gesture both encouraging and reassuring, then left the room with Marilyn Oakley, closing the door softly, as if to avoid disturbing the delicate atmosphere awaiting them as they faced the truth. Lauren stood still for a few seconds as if her feet wouldn't move. Finally, she took a deep breath and stepped inside, not daring to look directly at Elias. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I've come to apologize. A genuine apology. Not the hurried apology you get on an airplane, not an apology to get out of trouble, but... She paused, her voice choked. I'm sorry for looking at you with a gaze you didn't deserve. Elias didn't answer immediately. He invited her to sit down in the chair opposite him. Lauren sat down but kept her back straight like a student before a supervisor. She didn't evade. She didn't make excuses. Only a sincerity rarely seen in someone who had once been so confident it bordered on arrogance. Lauren, Elias said slowly in perfect TTS rhythm, I'm here to listen, not to judge. Say what you need to say. Lauren nodded, and a flood of emotions erupted. Last night I stayed up all night. I sat in my hotel room and reviewed all my actions, every glance, every word. And for the first time in years of my career, I realized I had become the kind of person I swore I would never be. She bit her lip, her eyes welling up again. When I first started this job, I always thought my job was to make every passenger feel respected, regardless of what they wore, where they came from, or what they looked like. But gradually, I was worn down by the pace of the work. The pressure, the unreasonable expectations of passengers, my own exhaustion, made me narrow my heart. She sighed, a long sigh that seemed to pull her heart down with it. Then I started judging people too quickly. Judging by appearances, making assumptions that had no basis. Lauren placed her hand on her chest as if afraid her heart was about to leap out of her chest. And you are the clearest victim of that. Elias looked at her not with the eyes of someone who had been offended, but with the eyes of someone who understood that people can be wrong. He said softly, "Lauren, what I want to hear now isn't your regret. It's what made you act that way. What led you to see me not as a passenger but as a nuisance?" Lauren didn't think he would ask such a probing question. It was a question that touched the most sensitive spot inside her. I don't know if I should say this. Tell me the truth," Elias interrupted, "for the truth will open a new path." Lauren nodded, tears beginning to fall. "My father," she said, her voice barely audible, "was a very prejudiced man. I grew up hearing prejudiced remarks about people of color, about immigrants, about anyone who didn't look like him." She clenched her fists. "And I thought I'd gotten over it. I thought I was an independent thinker. But last night, when you boarded the plane in that gray hoodie, the worst part of me surfaced faster than my reason could stop it." Elias closed his eyes slightly. Those words weren't an excuse. They were a confession. "Confession is not an easy thing to say," Lauren continued, "and the worst part was, seeing him calm, hearing him speak so gently, only made me more upset. I don't understand why I reacted that way. I acted as if he was challenging my authority. I was wrong. Fundamentally." She looked straight at him, her eyes filled with despair. "Mr. Carter, I didn't come asking for your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I realize my mistake. I realize the cracks in my heart that I've tried to hide for so many years. And I promise, I won't let that happen again, not even once with anyone." The space was enveloped in silence, a kind of silence that wasn't heavy but profound, like the pause between two low notes in an evening jazz piece. Elias finally spoke up. "Lauren, what you just said requires more courage than you think." She shed another tear. "Thank you, but I know. Words aren't enough to undo what I've done." Elias nodded. "That's right. Words are a starting point, not an end point." He sat up straighter, his voice steady. "You know, Lauren, many people think that discrimination always stems from malice, but sometimes it comes from ignorance, a dark corner we've never looked into. Last night you were controlled by that very dark corner," Lauren whispered. "I know. But today," Elias continued slowly and clearly, "she is turning the light on herself." A soft sob escaped Lauren. For the first time she felt not only guilt, but also relief. It was as if she had finally confronted her true self. Elias looked deep into her eyes. "I don't promise to forget this, but I believe in change. I believe in the human capacity to learn. And I will not use my power to destroy anyone's career, especially someone who is trying to make amends." Lauren nodded repeatedly, too scared to speak for fear of bursting into tears. Elias added one final gentle sentence. "Let what happened to me become the reason you treat others better." Lauren covered her mouth, tears falling onto her hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "From the bottom of my heart, thank you." Elias stood up. Lauren also stood up, not daring to extend her hand first, only bowing deeply. And he said the following to conclude the conversation. "Lauren, stand up straight. You're changing yourself. There's no need to bow your head." Lauren looked up, her eyes red but brighter. In the lounge, the soft light of the London morning shone on two people, stepping away from old prejudices, each in their own way. The door creaked open. Oliver and Marilyn stepped in, glancing at the two with caution. Elias simply said, "We can continue our collaboration, and Lauren deserves a second chance." Lauren raised her hand to her mouth, a mixture of surprise and gratitude on her face. Oliver let out a long sigh, as if releasing the weight of the entire night. Marilyn smiled very gently, but in Elias's heart, This moment only opened the next chapter of his journey, a journey whose fate he doesn't yet know will change countless more destinies. The midday London sun cast a soft glow on the tall glass windows of North Star Airlines headquarters. That light shone into the large conference room on the 23rd floor, where Elias Carter and Oliver Hayes were preparing for the airline's most important meeting in years. The long, polished walnut conference table held internal reports, contract drafts, and Elias's notebook, the notebook he always carried with him whenever he was about to undertake something of significant importance. Marilyn Oakley led a few assistants into the room, placed water and documents down, then bowed slightly to Elias before leaving. The atmosphere in the room still carried the lingering scent of the morning's conversation, heavy but genuine, tense yet hopeful. Oliver looked at Elias. "Are you ready?" Elias smiled, a slight but confident smile. "I was ready from the moment I boarded that flight." The meeting began with Oliver Hayes's firm and clear voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we are not just discussing a partnership with Halo Travel Gear. We are embarking on a journey of transformation, a crucial step for the future of North Star Airlines." The meeting room was completely silent. He continued. "Last night, one of our most esteemed partners, Mr. Elias Carter, experienced a flight that fell short of North Star's standards, not in terms of technical aspects, not in terms of overall service, but in terms of treatment. A manager sitting at the end of the table frowned, looking as if it were impossible. But Oliver quickly dispelled any doubts. Nothing is exaggerated. Everything is verifiable, and I want Elias himself to present it, so we can start on the right point." All eyes in the room were on Elias. He stepped forward, placed the notebook on the table, and opened it. His voice was soft, deep, and perfectly timed for TTS, slow enough for listeners to feel the rhythm but firm enough to keep everyone engaged. "I didn't come here to complain," he began. "I came to tell a story not just mine, but the story of thousands of other passengers who didn't have the chance to sit in this room." He recounted it in detail, the scrutinizing glances at boarding, the deliberate ignoring of others while serving drinks, the food tray slammed down on the table, the exclusionary silences. Not a single sentence was harsh, not a single word of personal condemnation. But the weight of each detail naturally brought the room to a somber silence. When Elias finished, a director sighed. "It's much worse than I thought." Elias closed the notebook. "But that's just the tip of the iceberg. North Star is a big brand, but the gap between service standards and the actual passenger experience is sometimes still very wide." Oliver looked at everyone. "That's why Elias is here today. He's not just a product partner. He'll be working with us to design a new cultural transformation program, a comprehensive program, not just short-term training." Elias stood up and walked to the projection screen. He changed the slide. "Starlight Initiative, a sky cleaning program." No one said anything, but everyone sensed they were about to witness something momentous. Elias explained, "I want to focus on 3 main pillars." He held up 3 fingers, his voice firm and decisive as if nailed to the conference table. 1. Unconditional respect. Respect doesn't matter whether someone wears a hoodie or a suit. It doesn't matter whether they're young or old. It doesn't matter what color they are. Respect must become the first language. 2. Identifying. Hidden biases. No one intentionally discriminates. But everyone has a dark side. We must learn to recognize it before it hurts others. 3. The inner journey of a service provider. It's not just about changing behavior, it's about changing perceptions. Service workers need emotional support, space to grow and heal. Everyone was taking notes attentively. Elias transitions to the next slide. "And to begin with, I wanted to get the person who understands this best involved, Marilyn Oakley." Marilyn stepped forward with her characteristic composure. Her voice was soft yet heavy with the experience of more than 3 decades in the sky. "I've encountered many difficult situations, but last night, I saw what hurt me the most." She looked around the meeting room. "It's not a lack of professionalism. It's a lack of mutual understanding. Flight crews are human beings too, tired, stressed, exhausted, and without empathy, they're inadvertently letting biases control them." Then she looked over at Elias. "But I also saw something beautiful. A passenger who had been treated unfairly remained calmer and more compassionate than many might imagine." Elias nodded slightly in thanks. Oliver stood up. "We will implement Starlight Initiative across the entire system within 6 months. Another manager raised his hand. "What about Lauren Mitchell's case?" I need to know so I can prepare a response when the union asks questions. Oliver glanced at Elias. Elias replied, she has confronted her mistakes, and she wants to make amends. North Star needs someone with the courage to change. I believe she deserves a second chance. Everyone in the meeting room was surprised. Oliver chuckled softly. That's why I want you to be involved in this initiative, Elias. The meeting lasted over 3 hours, ranging from philosophy to planning, from changing the service model to designing a new training room. The vision became clearer and more solid. When the meeting ended, only Elias and Oliver remained. The sunlight had turned a honey color, casting a peaceful beauty over the meeting room. Oliver poured Elias a glass of water. Elias, he said, I have to admit, you've made me think a lot. I used to think that airline culture only needed standardized procedures, polite attitudes, and behavioral control. Elias chuckled softly. No one is wrong to think that way. But he showed me something deeper, something hidden beneath the uniform and the smile. Something in the heart of each employee, Elias replied. Customers might forget their seats, they might forget their food, forget the movie on the plane. But they will never forget the feeling of being treated with disrespect, or the feeling of being valued. Oliver was silent for a few seconds, then asked a surprising question. Elias, do you ever feel tired of having to face prejudiced stares? Elias smiled a sad but beautiful smile. Yes, absolutely. I'm human. There are times when I want to scream, times when I want to give up, and times when I feel fed up. So how did you manage to stay so calm yesterday? Elias looked straight at him. Because I knew, if I didn't control myself, I would lose the opportunity to change this for others. Oliver paused. That statement seemed to open up a whole new dimension he had never considered. He stood up and extended his hand. Elias, I am so proud to be accompanying you on this journey. Elias shook his hand. We're going to clear the skies, Oliver, not just for me, but for all those who have silently suffered for so many years. They both looked out the window. The London runway stretched as far as the eye could see, with a few planes preparing for takeoff. It was like a promise. A new era is about to begin. 2 weeks after the historic meeting in London, the Starlight Initiative began rolling out across the entire North Star Airlines system. The first posters appeared at training centers. The representative image was a pale blue sky with a luminous outline like a sunrise, a symbol of cultural rebirth. Elias Carter was standing in the meeting room at the Chicago Training Center, where the first training session was about to take place. The room was bright and spacious, the scent of new wood mingling with the white light, creating an atmosphere that was both serious and hopeful. Beside him was Marilyn Oakley, her navy blue uniform giving her an air of both dignity and warmth. On the table were the latest slides, each concept and practical example refined repeatedly by Elias and Marilyn over the past 10 days. Oliver Hayes had flown in to open the show, but he was answering questions from the press and arrived a few minutes later. Marilyn looked at Elias and whispered, "Are you ready?" Elias took a deep breath and smiled slightly. We can't change the world in a day, but we can change how one person sees another, and that's the beginning. The sound of a door opening echoed. 30 crew members entered the room. Some people smiled and cheered. Others observed Elias with curiosity, who had become the focal point of the reform event. But there were also some cold, defensive, and unpleasant faces. Elias realized immediately these people hadn't come to learn. They had come to protest. After Oliver Hayes' opening remarks, brief, concise, and powerful, he handed the stage over to Elias. "Hello, everyone." Elias began, his voice deep and clear. "I know some of you are here voluntarily. Some of you were asked to be, and some of you didn't want to be here." The room stirred slightly. Elias didn't shy away. He wanted to face it straight. "I don't blame anyone. Change is never easy, especially when it requires us to look inward." A male employee in the back row, Thomas Reed, a veteran flight attendant with over 15 years of experience, crossed his arms and raised his eyebrows in a challenging manner. Elias saw it, but he didn't react. He continued, "Today I didn't come here to tell people they were wrong. I came here to help everyone understand one thing. Passengers don't remember what we said. They remember how we made them feel." Some people nodded in agreement. But Thomas remained motionless, his lips pressed together. Midway through the second part of his presentation, which simulated a situation of unconscious discrimination, Thomas suddenly raised his hand. "Excuse me," he said, his voice even but rather sharp. I have to be blunt, what you're saying sounds very idealistic. But have you ever flown 10 flights in a row, 14 hours without sleep, and had passengers yell at you just because they were drunk? The room was silent. Thomas stood up. We're not machines. We're tired. We're exhausted. And sometimes we react just to protect ourselves. But now you want us to sympathize with everyone, he raised his eyebrows. Do you know what it feels like to be so exhausted that you can no longer distinguish between people's good and bad intentions? A direct hit. A real challenge. Many people in the room looked at Elias, waiting to see how he would react. Marilyn stepped slightly forward, intending to intervene. But Elias gently gestured for her to wait. He took a step towards Thomas. Thank you for being honest, Elias replied, his voice soft and unwavering. And the answer is, yes. I know that feeling. Thomas raised his eyebrows in genuine surprise. Elias recounted, I've been through projects that lasted months, sleeping under my desk, living on coffee, and under pressure. I know what it feels like to be completely exhausted. I know what it feels like to be insulted by a client and still have to maintain a professional demeanor. He paused for a few seconds, creating a quiet rhythm perfect for storytelling. But I also know, fatigue should never be an excuse to hurt others. The whole room fell silent. Elias continued, Thomas, you're right. You're doing a difficult job. Much harder than many people out there imagine. But precisely because it's difficult, we must learn to protect our hearts so they don't become unwitting weapons. Thomas breathed heavily. He couldn't argue back. Not because he was completely convinced, but because Elias hadn't attacked him at all. Elias continued, I don't expect people to change in a single day. I just hope people realize. Sometimes a softening glance, a well-timed remark, a 3-second pause, can save an entire flight, and save the self-respect of the person in front of you. A young flight attendant placed her hand on her chest and nodded slightly. Thomas looked down as if the remark had struck an old wound within him. The training session continues. Elias presented a simulated video. A passenger is misunderstood simply because of their casual attire. A flight attendant ignores a person of color to serve a white person first. A disabled passenger receives complaints for needing assistance. This isn't meant to condemn anyone. It's meant to expose the dark side of their own professions to everyone. Marilyn stepped forward and recounted her story from her own experience, her voice deep and full of wisdom. I used to be impatient. I used to be judgmental. But then, I was touched by a passenger's kindness. When we see others for who they truly are, everything changes. Many people bowed their heads in silence. When the training session ended, everyone stood up, tired but thoughtful. Thomas walked up to Elias. The initial defiant look is gone. The defensive gaze is gone. Carter, he said, his voice low, Perhaps I was too harsh. Elias smiled. That's good. You've said what many people think but don't dare to say. Thomas sighed. I'm just afraid. These changes will just be a temporary trend, and then everything will go back to how it was. Elias placed his hand on his shoulder. Not this time. I'll be here, and Oliver will be too. We're serious. Thomas looked at him longer, then nodded. Okay, I'll give it a try. I can't promise it'll be perfect, but I'll give it a try. That was the first time Elias saw a glimmer of light in Thomas's eyes, a fragile yet real kind of hope. When the training room was empty, Elias stood alone by the window, looking out at the vast airport. Planes took off, planes landed. The paths of thousands of people intersected in the sky. Marilyn approached and gently placed her hand on his arm. You did a great job, Elias. He smiled. We still have a long way to go. Marilyn looked up at the hazy sky. Yes, but today, we have lit a spark of light. Elias looked in the direction she pointed. A North Star aircraft was accelerating, soaring upwards through a cloud that resembled milk, he whispered. That's right, a single spark, and then it will become the whole sky. But he didn't know that. In the corner of the room near the filing cabinet, someone else had overheard the entire training session. One person disagrees. One person doesn't believe in reform. One person is preparing to stir up even bigger trouble. And the next chapter will begin with that person. As evening fell over Chicago Airport like a thin layer of mist, the last rays of sunlight fading on the long, captivating runway. After his first training session, Elias Carter felt tired but relieved, like he had just overcome a major hurdle on his journey. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but at least He had seen the first rays of light. Marilyn Oakley had just left the training center to head to the airport. Oliver Hayes was in a video conference with London headquarters. Elias was left alone in the makeshift office North Star, had arranged for him a small room with glass doors overlooking the runway where planes constantly took off like the great heartbeats of the aviation industry. He opened his laptop and began jotting down areas for improvement for the next training session. Bullet points appeared, each line a building block for the new culture he envisioned. But then the door swung open. Elias looked up. A man stood in the doorway, tall, stern, with an unreadable tension in his eyes. He wore a North Star uniform but no name tag. "Who are you looking for?" Elias asked, his voice still calm. The man walked in, closing the door behind him. No greeting, no smile, no attempt to hide his anger. "My name is Derek Walsh," he said. "I'm the chief flight attendant for North Star's international routes." Elias put down his pen. Derek moved closer, his eyes as sharp as knives. "I want to talk about the program you're trying to impose on us." That was the moment Elias understood this was the person eavesdropping on the training session at noon. It's not about curiosity. It's not about learning. It's about preparing for confrontation. Derek, Elias said slowly, "If you have any concerns or opinions, I'm open to listening." "Listen," Derek chuckled coldly. "You act like you understand what we go through every day." Elias paused for a moment, creating a quiet space for him to express himself. Derek walked closer to the table, pointing down at the surface as if nailing each word. "You're not a flight attendant. You don't work 60 hours a week. You don't stand in the middle of an airplane cabin with dozens of angry passengers. You don't know the pressure we're under," Elias replied softly. "I don't deny those things." "Yes," Derek growled, "and you have no idea what Lauren Mitchell had to endure." When Lauren was mentioned, Elias's expression changed slightly, but he remained calm. "Lauren did the right thing," Derek continued. "She apologized. She regretted it. But what about you? You turned it into an opportunity to build an entire program of change. You turned one of her mistakes into a tool to pave the way for Halo to infiltrate North Star even deeper." Elias understood the problem. Derek wasn't against the show. He was against Elias. "Do you think I'm taking advantage of that to profit?" Elias asked in return. "What else do you do?" Derek frowned. "Halo sells suitcases. North Star buys suitcases. And you use the entire industry to rewrite the story as a savior hero." That voice held not only anger, it also carried a deep-seated fear, a fear of losing power, stability, and the rightness that Derek had believed in for 20 years in his profession. Elias stood up. No raising your voice, no threats, no defensiveness. He simply walked toward Derek, stopping a few steps away from him just enough to show respect. "Derek," Elias said, his voice low but firm, "change is frightening. But you're misunderstanding me." "I know all too well," Derek retorted. "You got my colleagues suspended for a month. You made the flight crew retrain as if they were criminals, and now you want to turn North Star into a stage to promote yourself." Elias looked him straight in the eye. "Derek, I didn't come here to build a brand. I came here to build respect. If I wanted to advertise, I would have put it in newspapers, appeared on television, or spent money on marketing." He paused for a moment. "But do you know what I did? I chose to remain silent throughout that flight. I didn't film. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just wanted one thing: for people to have a dialogue with each other." Derek's breathing slowed. He wasn't as aggressive as he had been at the beginning, but he was still tense. Elias continued, "And Lauren, she wasn't suspended because of me. She was suspended because of the culture here, which makes her believe that such behavior is normal." Those words struck the deepest crack in Derek's heart. He avoided Elias's gaze, just for a second. But Elias saw it clearly, a truth that Derek had been avoiding for a long time. "Derek," Elias said more softly, "you're angry with me because I reminded you that this system has been rotten for years, and you've witnessed it without being able to change it." Derek clenched his fists. "What do you know about trying to change a giant company? We've tried. We've made suggestions, but the leadership never listens." "Until now," Elias said. A simple sentence, but it was like a sudden snap, like someone turning a key on a door that had been rusted for years. Derek looked up. His eyes no longer held just anger, but were now tinged with pain. "Do you really think so?" Derek whispered. "Do you think this time they really want to change?" Elias nodded. "Oliver Hayes is getting involved. Marilyn is getting involved. And more importantly, people like you, those who understand the field, have to get involved. Derek was silent for a very long time. A very long time. Then he sighed, as if releasing years of pent-up disappointment. Carter, his voice lowered, less sharp, less harsh. I'm afraid the change is just a fad. I'm afraid that in a few months everything will be back to how it was. Elias placed his hands on the table and leaned forward. And I fear the opposite. I fear that if things don't change, passengers like me, or worse, those who have no voice, will continue to be harmed. A long silence. A necessary silence. Finally, Derek said, I need to see it. Before I believe you. Elias nodded. So let's build it together. You don't need to believe me right now. Just get involved. Honestly, so you can see for yourself. Derek took a deep breath and stepped back. Okay, he said slowly. I'll observe. I'll do my job. But if I see you exploiting this for advertising, I'll be the first to stand up and protest. Elias smiled, unafraid, unharmed. Good. Real change needs people like you. People who dare to speak up, dare to verify things, and dare to keep things within limits. Derek stared at him for a long time. Then he turned around and opened the door. Before leaving, he said one thing, Carter. Don't disappoint me. The door closed. Elias stood alone in the room. He didn't know if Derek would be an ally or the biggest undercurrent of the reform program. But he knew one thing. Real change only begins when the strongest opponents agree to enter into dialogue. And on that day, Elias sowed a seed, though its future remained uncertain. 3 months flew by like the wind on the runway. Starlight Initiative, the reform program that Elias Carter and North Star Airlines jointly developed, had spread not only within the airline but had also become an inspiring story in the aviation world. Not everything is perfect. Some places are progressing quickly, some are still slow, some people are enthusiastic, some are still cautious. But one thing is undeniable, the skies over North Star are changing. Elias felt this acutely during his flight from Chicago to New York, the last flight he would take before the program entered its system-wide rollout phase. He boarded the plane. The welcoming sounds came naturally. Welcome aboard North Star Airlines, Mr. Carter. Not excessive, not ingratiating, just genuine respect. The person who said that was Derek Walsh. Derek stood upright, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the chair, as if to steady himself. Gone was the cold, sharp look he'd had when he first met Elias, nor was there the defensive posture he'd displayed the day he'd entered the office to confront him. Instead, there was a small but profound change. The eyes no longer showed fear of loss, but only listening. Derek Elias nodded slightly. I didn't think I'd see you on this trip. This is my new route, Derek replied. And allow me to say this before you sit down. Elias tilted his head. I'm listening. Derek took a deep breath, like a man setting aside years of self-respect to say the right thing. Today I want you to know, I was wrong. Elias said nothing. He let Derek find the words himself. I was against your program. I thought it was interference. I thought you were making things more complicated. But after 3 months, working with Starlight, I realized the scariest thing isn't change. He paused, his voice softening. The scariest thing is seeing yourself as part of the problem. A single sentence made Elias close his eyes slightly, not because of pain, but because of emotion. Derek swallowed hard and then continued. Once I served an elderly man who looked quite disheveled. Previously, I would have frowned inwardly. But that time, I paused for 3 seconds. I chose not to judge. I asked him what he needed, and he looked at me, his eyes red, and said, Thank you for treating me with such respect. Derek pursed his lips. That's when I understood he was right. A small moment can save someone's whole day. Elias felt a lump in his throat. He never expected that his strongest protest would turn into his most sincere expression of gratitude. Elias placed his hand on Derek's shoulder. Not everyone has the courage to look at their wounds. Derek chuckled softly. It was the first time Elias had seen him genuinely laugh. You know what? Now I'm the one urging other teams to participate in the training. My colleagues even jokingly call me the Walsh Starlight Ambassador. Elias burst out laughing. That's a nice name. As the plane took off, Elias leaned his head against the back of his seat. The steady hum of the engines was like the heartbeat of the sky. He felt one thing distinctly: this journey no longer belongs to him alone. It has become the journey of North Star Airlines. A moment later, a flight attendant approached, soft brown hair, a gentle face. "Mr. Carter, someone sent this for you." She placed a cup of hot tea on his table. No note, no message. Just a warm gaze. Elias smiled slightly and asked, "Who sent it?" She replied, "You'll find out soon enough." When the plane landed in New York, Elias stood up and took his Halo X briefcase out of the overhead compartment. And at the back of the plane, near the emergency exit, someone was waiting. Lauren Mitchell. No more international uniform. No more tension. Just a calm woman looking tired but at ease. She smiled and slowly walked closer. "Well, I thought I should at least bring the tea myself. But I'm too shy, so I asked a colleague." Elias chuckled softly. "The tea is delicious. Thank you." Lauren looked at him with eyes that had completely changed since that fateful night. "Elias," she said slowly, "I want you to know, thanks to the Starlight program, I've relearned how to see other people. Not through fear, not through prejudice, but through curiosity and respect." She took a deep breath. "Today is my first day back on international flights." Elias nodded, his eyes filled with pride. "I'm happy for you, honestly." Lauren bowed her head slightly. "Thank you for not ruining my life. Thank you for helping me find the best version of myself." Elias replied, "I didn't do it. She did it herself. I just opened the door." A tear rolled down Lauren's cheek, but it was a tear of relief, not fear. She took a step back. "Have a safe journey, Elias," he replied. "You too. And welcome back to the sky." When Elias stepped off the plane, Oliver Hayes was standing there, still wearing the same dark blue suit, with the same warm smile as when he first met him in London. "The contract has been fully approved by the board," Oliver said. "Starlight will become North Star's long-term project, and we want you as a senior advisor." Elias raised an eyebrow. Senior advisor Oliver nodded. "Not for suitcases. For people." Elias laughed and put the suitcase down. "Oliver, you know I'm just the CEO of a small company." Oliver patted him on the shoulder. "No, you're the one who changed my airline. And then, there will be many more places to come." They shook hands, a long, meaningful handshake. The New York sky that afternoon was unusually clear. A North Star plane flew overhead, leaving a long trail of light like a glimpse into a new future. Elias watched and said softly, "Dignity is the new luxury. Respect is the new luxury." Oliver laughed. "No, it's the standard now." Before leaving the airport, Elias opened his phone. He typed a message for the Halo travel gear team. "We're not just selling suitcases. We're contributing to changing how people treat each other. Keep moving forward." He pressed send. Then, dragging the Halo X suitcase gently across the tiled floor, I stepped out into the late afternoon sun. No fanfare, no hype. Just a calm, strong, and quiet black man in a gray coat continuing on his chosen path. There is no path that leads to success, but to meaning. The voice slowed down, becoming warm and low. Elias's story reminds us that sometimes just a moment, a glance, a word, is enough to change someone else's journey, and it can change our own. If this story makes you think or gives you a glimmer of hope amidst this turbulent world, please leave a like, share, or subscribe to the channel. Because who knows, your small action today might help another beautiful story take flight.